Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you into this morning's webinar where we're going to spend some time looking at the sales and other reports pieces in the reporting module of AuroWriter. We're currently looking at my main AuroWriter screen. Again, we're not going to focus on usage at point of sale today. We're actually going to move over on the left-hand side into the icon here that says Reporting. As I click on Reporting, it launches the reporting module of AuroWriter, where again we'll skip the first icon up there that says End of Day, and again the focus of today's webinar is going to be the sales reports and other reports icons here towards the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to click on Sales Reports first, and as it opens up my Sales Reports window, we're not going to go through each and every report that's in this window. I'll tell you it'd be much longer than the half an hour to 40 minutes or so I've got set aside for this morning's conversation. However, one thing that I always point users towards as far as any reports are concerned, and it's true whether we're talking about sales reports, reports in the inventory module, AP or AR, or really any report inside of the system, and that's the help menu inside of AuroWriter. If I go up inside of my reporting screen and I click on help and or help or hit the F1 key on my keyboard, it will launch me out to the AuroWriter support page. Now, depending on the version of AuroWriter that you're running, you'll have one of two different behaviors. I'm running version 1.31.39, which is the current release version of the AuroWriter software. In this window here, as I click on the help menu, it takes me out to the docs.aurowriter.com webpage, which is now our online version or our hosted version of our help page. And you'll notice it took me directly out into the reporting module. And then again, if I wanted to look at any of the different topics that were there, in our case, sales reports, you'll notice it brings me directly to the link to the sales report piece. And what I like to point folks towards is if you go down through the list, you'll see towards the bottom where we have a detailed description and a sample of each report that's in the system. So if you ever have a question about a report, where does a specific number come from, and or how are we generating a particular value, this is a great tool or resource to look towards. Now, I said different behavior based upon the version. The docs.aurowriter.com link was introduced again with version 1.31. So if you're running a version prior, we actually would load the help file on your local computer. So again, if it doesn't take you out to a web page, but it simply launches you into a help menu, again, that's versions prior to version 1.31. With the docs.aurowriter.com site, the nice thing about us hosting it online is that we now have the ability to add and or modify information much quicker, and again, get that directly out to market through that link that takes us out to the web page. So again, as we talk about reporting and or reports, and it's universal in the system, whatever report you're looking towards, the help menu is a great resource for information about a particular report. We are going to look at, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 different reports in the sales report window today, the ones that I find used most commonly or frequently throughout the AuroWriter user community. We'll start out at the very top with the summary report. I'm going to run this not just for a day, we're going to go back to a little bit longer time frame. We'll go back to the month of April. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to print up my summary report. When I click on print, takes a second to compile the information, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to print those to the screen. So as I click on the screen icon, it's going to allow us to view that on screen before we actually spool it off to the printer. In my case, it's opened up down here at the bottom of the screen. I'll click on it to bring it up. What you'll notice is I've got my summary report, which is kind of the 50,000 foot view of what the shop did in the time frame that we have selected, starting with towards the upper left-hand corner. Section talks about sales broken down by parts, labor, and or sublet work. You'll notice there's a section here that's in red that has the asterisks in front of it. In my case, the asterisk stands for tires, and I'm splitting out my tire sales differently than just my general sales so that I can see what my performance was in each. So in this case, we've got total sales and parts of $51,000. In tires, I had just over $1,100 for the month of April, and then the total sales, $91,627.08. We got discounts, $97.47. Those are compiled and or reflective of if I'm in AuroWriter and I'm in any ticket that's either in estimates or work in progress. Over to the calculations tab, if I click on this discounts button here, if I was to give a customer a discount, whether it's a percentage and or a dollar amount, those dollars get reflected on the summary report here, and they are subtracted from this number here. So this is my true sales, not including discounts. Coupons, package savings, and premium charges were driven by a facet or a module of AuroWriter called AuroWriter Express, If you were using that particular piece, which was designed primarily for the quick lube industry, you can use some additional functionality relative to those particular facets. Not a very commonly used icon, module, and/or not one that we're actively still enabling users to go forward with. But if you're using Express, you would potentially see numbers that would show up in those values as well. After we get through our sales, we've got our gross profit. And again, in my case, I've also broken out my tire sales, listing out parts, labor, sublet, and then segregated into this red section with the asterisks, specific to, in my case, the tire sales. We're going to come back and take a look at how do I break those out here after we're done talking about the summary report in general. As we scroll down through the list, I've got my other charges, which would include my supply charges, non-taxable supplies if they were assessed against transactions that were flagged as non-tax or tax exempt, as well as the total sales tax I've collected. Other taxes and fees would be if I'm assigning and or assessing any non-taxable fees inside of the system. Again, a little more about that here as we leave the summary report, talk about some of the options that are configurable that will impact the behavior of this particular report. So other taxes and fees, and if I was either upcharging or discounting based upon usage of a credit card, we'd see those dollars there. We didn't have any advance payments or any accounts receivable payments in the time frame we've defined. So down here at the bottom, my total sales and other, inclusive of my sales tax, my shop supplies, my other taxes and fees, then a breakdown by tender type down here at the bottom, including we did have one AR transaction that was charged in the course of the time frame that we had defined. I did a total of 666 repair orders in the month of April, a bit ominous there. But then we had a $146 average ticket without tax, and then $154.43 inclusive of sales tax. So our total numbers down here on the right-hand side. So the summary report is kind of a 50,000-foot view, a very high-level overview of the transactional information that was available for the time frame we've selected. There's a couple of different things I want to take a look at that feed into and or help to control the behavior of the summary report, starting with, you notice at the very top in this little parentheses here, it says tires. If I wanted to have that be reflective of some other type of service, I can configure what ends up in that breakout group. We start out down in the lower left-hand corner with this button here that says Sales Report Options. When I click on Sales Report Options, you'll notice down here at the bottom it says Summary Report Breakout Label. What this essentially says is in those parentheses with that asterisk preceding, what should it say? So if I wanted to change that, I didn't want that to be tires, but I wanted it to be, let's say, filters, because I wanted to keep track of my filtration and or maybe my oil changes or my maintenance separately. I can change what that value says by simply clicking on OK. What we'll now see is if I was to rerun my summary report, go ahead and print that to the screen once again. As it comes up, what you'll find is in that parentheses, notice it's now changed what that header says. So again, no more difficult than just changing that value, and we can change it dynamically over the course of time. Now I changed it to say something different that didn't change the data that falls within these broken out sections here in red with the asterisks preceding. That's actually driven based upon my configuration. So I'm going to jump out of reporting here for just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of my discounts window and go over into configuration, because we break out the parts and the labor separately, meaning in order to get the parts to segregate themselves, that's actually done at the department group level. So underneath configuration down to parts and then over to parts department groups. If I was to open that window there, put my password in, and then if I was to scroll all the way down to the very bottom, in my case, I was having it break out my tire sales. When I select my tire group, over here on the left-hand side, breakout parts on sales summary report, that box was checked, and you'll notice again the header or the name of that field dynamically will change based upon what we've got over in our sales reports option. If I said I didn't want that to be reflective of tires anymore, because we're going to have it break out our maintenance, or in my case, my filter items, I'll go ahead and uncheck that box. I'll click on Save, and then if I was to go through my category listing again, I said, well, let's just go down and let's have it include my filtration parts. So I'll select that and again check the box here where it says filters and then hit save in the lower right hand corner. So we've done the parts, but we do the labor separately, meaning if I was to go ahead and save that, I'll close out of here and underneath the configuration header, heading down this time to labor, and over to operations, we do the breakout for labor at the operation level. Meaning if I was to go again down to my category for tire service, and in here I've got a list of jobs that will be used as I'm not only plugging and patching, but installing tires. I'll just select my one tire job, and what you'll notice in the lower left-hand corner, there is that box that says breakout labor on sales summary report. Well, I don't want that to be tires anymore. So if I was going to do that, I'll have to go through each one of my jobs that I've got already broken out individually, because I've got jobs for 1, 2, 3, and 4 tires as I'm selling them to the consumer. We'll go ahead and we will uncheck each of those so that they no longer are reflected and or broken out on that sales summary report. But this time, we're going to actually want to go back up to my category for filters. And I would go through and say, well, let's go ahead and let's include that. Let's do cabin air filters and on down the line. So again, if I wanted this to be indicative of all of the different jobs within this particular category, I would simply go through one at a time, check that box, hit save after each, and then I'll cancel back out. And then now back over to my summary report. Again, we'll go ahead and recompile for the month of April. And once we do, we'll bring it up on the screen. And again, we'll see that the data should change based upon the fact that we now have a different category broken out, so a little more dollars in filtration in the month of April than I had for tires. So what this says and what these values represent, both here in my sales section and here in my profit section, is driven at the department group level for parts and at the labor operation level for labor jobs. So again, we can dynamically change that. Now I said a couple of other things as we went through. Other taxes and fees, if we go back down to configuration, underneath the configuration header and over to parts. In my other taxes and fees window, I have 9 different fees that I can set up inside of the system. And in my case, I'm charging a state tire fee. I also have to charge a battery fee, and also I'm charging for tire disposal. So anytime either a tire or a battery gets added to the ticket, the applicable values get charged as well. On the summary report, it is the non-taxable fees that get broken out into that other taxes and fees section. So where you're looking at down here, other taxes and fees, that's going to be just the non-taxable fees. So in my case, I've got tire disposal set up as a taxable fee. That will get rolled up with the parts sales at the top. It's only the non-taxable fees that have been assessed that will appear in that section down below. One last piece as far as the summary report is concerned, I'm going to go back to configuration down to repair order this time, and I'm going to go down to my taxes and fees section. When I come into the taxes and fees window, in the lower left-hand corner, there's an option there for credit card fees. If I was going to tell the system that I wanted to upcharge for a credit card, now typically if you're going to do that, you'd give a discount for cash, but if you said upcharge for credit card, then again, any dollars that get collected for that end up here in this credit charges section down in the lower right-hand corner. So depending on your configuration, the behavior of the summary report can vary slightly. You figure the sales total is always going to be inclusive of all of the dollars that were collected for that time frame. However, what's broken out and whether or not you've got taxes and fees and or credit charges driven by the way the system is configured. I'm going to close out of this window here and go back over to just my sales report piece. Because again, we have the summary report inside of the system, which is that high-level view of the day that we, or the day, the month, the week that we had selected as we compiled the report. Directly beneath that is what's called the shop performance report. Now, the shop performance report was introduced with version 1.28. So if you haven't noticed it before, it came along with version 128. And unique in that, the shop performance report is the only report in the system, if you'll pay attention to my date range here, that runs just for a specific date. It will not run for a period of time. It will just run for the date that's been selected. I'm going to go ahead and run it for last Friday. I'm going to see exactly what my shop performance report reflected for last Friday. And as I compile my shop performance report, we'll go ahead and let it finish compiling and then print that to the screen. So let me close my summary report here. And let me print that shop performance report to the screen. And as it comes up, you're going to find that this is a 2-page report. And one of the reasons that it compiles just for a single day is because we do some things about, we capture some coming in and going out values. Meaning, for example, in the lower right-hand corner, our beginning AR balance and our ending AR balance for the day. In this case, on the 6th of May, I didn't have any AR transactions, so that number not impacted. Information like parts and labor sales, sales broken down by parts, labor, sublet, and so on and so forth. So the same types of information that we see on the summary report, but there's some values in the shop performance report we can't really get anywhere else without compiling a number of other reports. For example, my profit summary, I've got daily, week-to-date, month-to-date, and then year-to-date totals, not only for my sales, but also for my gross profit as well. Some other key metrics in terms of my average ticket time, the average dollars per part and labor on the repair order, and whether we reopened any repair orders within the time frame that was selected. If I'm using the accounting interface inside of our writer, it will populate my cash drawer reconciliation for the day. And then if I looked up towards the top of the screen, you'll notice this is page 1 of 2. If I went from page 1 to 2, we'll see it's doing things like beginning and ending inventory balances. Now you notice mine is just a bunch of pound signs and or hashtags, depending on how old you are. The way that this behaves is the shop performance report information is generated either by running an end of day and or by running the shop performance report. So either one of those will create that snapshot. If we didn't either run end of day and or run the shop performance report for the selected day, then the system won't generate that snapshot. So one of the reasons I'm an advocate of running end of day each day at the end of business is to make sure we're capturing that information for the shop performance report. A breakdown by category of the sales that we had done for that day, and I didn't have any fleet transactions. My total hours based upon my punches in and out on the time clock out here on the right-hand side, then a breakdown by employee, including information such as the number of jobs, total sales that they generated, their jobs per clock hour, and then if you're using the time clock inside of our writer, we use it to track actual time versus clock time, and then how many hours they flagged, and then calculate out both productivity as well as efficiency. Now the actual time merits a bit more conversation because if I go back over into our writer, the way the actual time works is inside of each job there is the build time, so down there in the lower right-hand corner, 6/10 of an hour is what we're billing this customer for removing or replacing a power steering pressure switch. Out to the left, there's also a box there that says elapsed time. The elapsed time is intended to indicate exactly how long it took, not necessarily how long the book says it should have taken. So if I was to enter a value in there, so in this case, if I said, well, that took 5/10 of an hour, then that's now going to filter down to that actual time in order to have the system calculate out again that productivity and the efficiency value. Now we can also have the system keep track of exactly how long it took. So as opposed to actually typing a value into the elapsed time, if I'm looking just at the main hour writer window, looking at my parts and labor detail, and I highlight one of the labor jobs that's on the ticket, I'll ask you to pay attention to this icon out here to the left-hand side that looks like a wrench. There are actually 3 different icons that could appear over there. In my case, I'm going to leave that job highlighted. I'm going to hit the T, as in Tom, key on my keyboard. And what you'll notice is that wrench turns from the icon it was previously to a little clock because it's now going to keep track of exactly how long it's going to take to perform this service. So what it's really doing when the clock is turned on is it's populating that elapsed time. You'll notice we're now just at 1/100th of an hour that we've got in terms of the build time so far. That'll continue to count until we turn that time clock off, and there's really 2 ways that we do that. In some cases, I may not want to flag the job as having been finished yet. However, we've got for whatever reason, a stop in the action, so I could just hit the T key again, and then now it turns my clock off. I'm no longer counting up that elapsed time. If I turned it back on, again, it'll just start from where it was. It won't overwrite. It says, well, we took some time to take the old one off, and then we waited until the vendor brought us our new power steering pressure switch. So I want to not keep track of how much time we waited. I just want to keep track of how much time we actually worked. The other way is if we double-clicked on that, and then in the lower left-hand corner, we clicked on Finished. Now when I click on OK, what you'll notice is my elapsed time now grayed out because it says, well, we've told the system this job is finished, and then also that icon on the left-hand side turns to that red check mark. And again, as I'm looking down the list, it's a visual cue of which jobs have been finished, which jobs are still yet to be performed. So again, we can use the labor time clock, and again, that feeds into what's called the actual time on this report here. If you're not using that function, it's not that the report won't print, it's just it will not calculate or give us any value in this space here on our shop performance report. So again, introduced with version 1.28 and kind of a consolidation of information from a number of different reports in our writer brought into a single entity. Again, unique in its fact that it can only be printed for a single day, as opposed to any other report we'll look at where we can define a date range, whether it's a single day, month, year, whatever custom date range you'd like to put in there. As we continue on down, the next report is our RO sales ledger. And as I click on this report here, I'll ask you to pay attention to this little box down here where it says Group by Tax ID. If I click on the RO sales ledger, this box here that says Group by Tax ID is checked. That's the only report that actually pays attention to that little box down there in the lower right-hand corner. When I click on print, we can print it just for the single day. We don't need to go too far beyond just that one-day time frame. But as I go ahead and print that report, this just lists out by transaction the sales that were collected that day. You'll notice my tax ID type default, and that's the only one I've got listed here. If you had a tax-exempt sale, so back over on the RO Writer side, if I was to go into my Edit Customer window and in the Other Info tab flag that as being tax-exempt, they would show up in a separate listing with its own subtotal on the RO sales ledger. So if I was trying to keep track of, well, how much did I collect in sales tax and versus how much did I do in tax-exempt sales, then again, we can use that RO sales ledger. One other piece, you'll notice it said default. You do have the ability in RO Writer to define multiple different tax types. For example, in the state of Illinois, if there's a vehicle that is used for agricultural purposes, it's billed at a different tax rate than just a general over-the-road vehicle. So if I wanted to and or needed to charge disparate tax rates, I could create as many different tax types as I'd like over here on the configuration side. And again, as I looked at my RO sales ledger, what we'd find is, again, each grouped into its own section with a separate subtotal, so I can keep track of the dollars that were associated with each of those individual reports. The X in the upper right-hand corner, we'll get back just to our sales reports window. As we continue down, we're going to skip around just a little bit. The next one we're going to look at is my itemized sales report. And I'm going to run that for a bit of a longer time frame. We'll go back and look at the month of April again. As I compile this report, the itemized sales report is the best report I can point you towards that will keep track of not only units of sale, but also dollars for a particular part type. What I mean by that is, in here we've got our part sales. In the department group air conditioning, we only had part sales for one department. It was our AC miscellaneous, 730 units in total. If I looked at my brake pads and shoes, I've got 4 different departments based upon whether it's a warranted brake pad, it's an organic, it's a ceramic, or it's a semi-metallic. And again, a breakdown of how many units as well as the margin achieved with each of the individual departments inside of the system. So the itemized sales report driven by both departments and then parts and then the department group associated, so that we get not only a department breakdown, a subtotal by group, and then if I was to go to the very last page, total sales in general in parts for the time frame that we had selected. We'd also see if we were going to, the labor breakdown, and then menu sales is driven by inside of an individual transaction. If I was to open up a part, I was going to flag it as a menu item. What menu does is it says we're going to keep this part on this customer's transaction so that we can keep track of the cost, keep track of the outside purchase, keep track of the fact that that part was inclusive on this transaction. However, we're not going to charge the consumer. So when I click on OK, you'll notice it now goes to menu and my parts total removed. So again, if I wanted to make sure that I recorded a part was sold, use the cost as part of the profitability calculation, but not actually charge the consumer whatever the selling price would be, I can flag it as a menu item. The itemized sales report would then tell me exactly how many of those menu items and or what dollar amount for the time frame we've selected were flagged as menu. So again, if I'm trying to keep track of which ones am I putting on the ticket but not charging the consumer for, your itemized sales report will give you that information. As we're continuing down, the RO profit report the one that I'll typically point users towards as something they can take a look at to do a better assessment beyond just breaking out tires, or now in our case, filtration. I'd like to take a look and see exactly what the individual profit by transaction was. So again, if I'm expecting the shop to achieve a specific margin, now I ran it for a 30-day time frame. So it'll take me a little while to search through this list here, but as I'm going down through, you can see that we've got some fairly high dollar transactions, and then the margin out here to the right-hand side. It'll show me the breakdown of parts versus labor on each transaction as well. So again, if I'm looking at a report daily to do an assessment of the shop profitability, the RO profit report or the repair order profit report would be the best example I would point you towards in order to manage and or keep track of that particular metric. Continuing down, the next one down is our labor summary report. I'm going to click on the labor summary report, and in this report I will tell you I wouldn't point you towards necessarily the first page. While there is relevant information about the labor broken down by individual category for that particular time frame, as we get a little further down we'll find what's called the sales by category report that I find to be a bit more usable. But on the second page you actually get a breakdown by technician. So whereas on the shop performance report we had an individual day for each technician looking at not only the number of jobs, but the amount of time, not only book, clock, and then also what we called actual time. This will sum total that for whatever date range we've provided. So not just looking at a single day, but looking at, in this case, a month, and I can see that Bart had 560 jobs. He actually had a total build time of 154.51 for the month of April. It actually took him almost 203 hours to produce that 154 hours of book time, but he was only punched in for 64. So I'm not sure exactly how that worked out, but so he was 240% productive. Really, we have some missing punches likely for my friend Bart, but again, productivity, efficiency, and proficiency, all calculations of these three values here: actual time, clock time, and build time. And again, that labor summary report gives you that collective total for those values over the course of the entire month, as opposed to the shop performance report, which again prints for just that single day. The detail report would allow us to say for each individual technician exactly what hours and or what jobs were assigned. So I want to see not just what made up those 550 jobs we were assigned to Bart Smith, but I'd like to see the detail of each individual. And again, in this case, a fairly significant number of pages in my report, printing that for an entire month. But if I wanted to print it for a week because I was compensating my technicians potentially upon the revenue they're generating and or the number of hours that they've flagged, that this will give them the detail of what was credited to them for whatever time frame we've selected. So again, the labor summary and or the labor detail report giving us a little bit more of an insight into the technician's performance over our designated time frame. As we continue down, we got labor summary by pay date and labor detail by pay date. These reports here, the labor summary and the labor detail report, look at the finalized date of an invoice. So when I finalize the transaction, that's when it shows up in these reports here. There is also, let me jump back to OurWriter for just a moment, there is also inside of each labor job a box down there that says pay date. So we flagged this job as finished, and if I said they finished it on the 9th, and we'll say that that was yesterday, if I was to run the labor detail by pay date, then it looks for anything that has a pay date flagged within the designated time frame. So if I wasn't going to finalize this transaction until next week, but I wanted to make sure that it got included in my reports for today, for when we ran, say, payroll reports or other technician performance reports, the labor summary and detail by pay date look not at the day the invoice was finalized, but the pay date that's assigned to the transaction. For open tickets, it will only look at ones where that box is checked as finished. For a finalized transaction, if this box is flagged as finished, then it will maintain that pay date forever and ever. If the box is not checked as finished, then the pay date by default gets assigned as the day the invoice was finalized. So it's not necessary to check that on each one, only again if you wanted to make sure it got included in those by pay date reports. So again, very similar reports, but it's just based on whether it's the finalized invoice date and or the pay date assigned to that labor operation inside of the system. So again, depending on whether we're doing the pay date and or finished would determine which of those segments of reports would be more applicable. As you continue down, I mentioned a report called the Sales by Category report. And as I looked at the labor summary report, I said that this was a report that I would probably use to assess my performance as opposed to that labor summary report. The difference with the Sales by Category report is it will give us a breakdown, much like the shop performance report did for a single day, by category for whatever time frame we've designated. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to print that to the screen. As I print that to the screen, it's going to go ahead and bring up and tell me that in the time frame we've selected, we did 582 jobs in the category of breaks, with this was our total book time, our breakdown of labor parts, and then other is going to be a combined total of our shop supplies as well as any discounts that were given through that discounts button back on the Our Writer side. So this tells me by individual category. The other benefit to the Sales by Category report is it's actually a drill down report. So if I double clicked on breaks, it will take me in and it now opens up a separate tab. You'll notice main report and then breaks, and it tells me by individual technician, here was what they had done in that particular time frame. And if I wanted to go even one level deeper, I could double click on an individual technician, and now it tells me by individual transaction, not only time, parts, labor, as well as profitability for each individual transaction within that category. If I wanted to go back and just look at a different category again, I can continue, and all it does is it keeps opening up additional tabs up here across the top. If I'd like to close any of the ones we've opened, there's that little X in the upper right-hand corner, which will take me back and close out of some of the windows we've pulled up. So the Sales by Category report allows us to drill into the information a little bit deeper, see a little bit more of what makes up the numbers as opposed to just the numbers themselves. It's also unique in that you'll notice a button over here on the right-hand side that says Select All. Whereas if I ran, say, my labor summary report, it's going to give me just all of my labor jobs regardless of category. When I clicked on the Sales by Category report, again, you'll notice that that button lights up. There's actually 6 different reports that will allow us to use this Select All button here, the Sales by Category, the first one in the list we come to. What I could do here is I could say, well, I'd like to only look at specific categories. Let's take my tires and let's take my filtration out of this particular report. And once I've done that, if I come back in here, click on the multi-select button and hit print, then now those categories are removed from my Sales by Category report. So again, if I wanted to look at my performance with certain elements not included, then that would be my tool, just going in and doing that multi-select and unchecking any categories I would prefer not to be included. Again, it'll look relatively similar, but again, didn't highlight it as we started, but if you'll notice, no longer in this list here is my filtration category and or, again, alphabetical going down, my tire service category. So you can vary the items that we see on that Sales by Category report using that button on the right-hand side. As long as we're over here on the right-hand side, you'll notice we've got Profit Center and we have Service Writer. If you're using either, then we could use these to filter down and say, well, I only want to look at, in my case, I've got my general repair, and then I also have a quick lube bay that we're feeding cars through all day long. I want to keep track of the revenue that's generated individually, so I've got Profit Center turned on, and each transaction gets assigned a Profit Center. And or I've got 2 different service writers. I've got Earl and I've got Andy. I'd like to see the average dollar per ticket, or the total revenue generated by each individual that's upwriting service, so I can go ahead and I can filter my reports by service writer as well. So again, different conditions that can help drive. Now these, not just unique to the Sales by Category report, any report in the system, I can use the Profit Center and or the Service Writer filter to, again, minimize and or exclude certain values from it so I can assess performance by either Profit Center and or Service Writer. As we continue down, we've got our Sales by Category, and then the Sales by Technician report also looks at this multi-select. If I come back in here, we'll turn them all back on and compile that. This is essentially the same report as the Sales by Category report, except the data sliced and diced a little bit differently. So as opposed to seeing brakes, exhaust, filtration, tire service as my categories, when I run my Sales by Technician report, what I can do is I can then print that to the screen, and now it tells me by individual technician what their performance was for the selected time frame. So I've got Bart that was assigned to 186 different invoices in the month of April, if I was to double click on BART, it shows me that these were the breakdown by category for BART for the time frame that we've selected. So again, we can drill into the data and see a little bit more about not only what was the technician's sales, but by individual category, what types of work were they assigned to in the time frame that we've selected. We have our sales by category, our sales by technician. Again, there's a half a dozen reports in here that will allow us to use that multi-select button as we go through. Directly beneath that, we've got our outside purchases report. The outside purchases report is important if you're not using accounts payable, meaning if I'm in our writer and I'm posting everything into AP, then we'd probably use something like a detail of expenses by supplier or a summary of expenses by account to keep track of my accounts payable. If we're not, in the outside purchases report, we'll look at any part that was sold with a vendor invoice associated. What I mean by that is, if you go back over into our writer, and I'm going to pull the power steering pressure switch back up again, while we won't say it's a menu item, over here on the right-hand side, I've got a value in my invoice number box. If I'm not using accounts payable, that box is likely just open for us to edit. In my case, because I'm using accounts payable, I've got the box locked down, so I have to post accounts payable. But it's looking for anything that has a value in that invoice number box. So if I'm not using accounts payable, this is my report to determine, well, what parts were purchased from outside vendors for a given time frame. The other nice thing that you can use this report for is if you're looking for a part, meaning we went through the entire month of April, and I know I bought a part from a vendor at some point in time. I'd like to know what transaction it was associated with. Well, if I went, in my case, I'm going to just hold down the Control key and hit the F key on the keyboard. What that does is it says, well, let's find a particular text value. So if I said, well, let's go ahead and let's just find, I know that the part number started with BP. Well, there's the first instance of any part that starts with the character BP. And again, there's the invoice number those were sold on. If I said find next, system just continues to wheel through the report, looking for whatever string I've entered in here. So if I ran it for a year and I had a report that was going to be a couple of 100 pages long, but I was looking for one very specific element, I could just type that in, use the search functionality to go through the entire report relatively quickly and find the value I'm looking for. Hit the X in the upper right-hand corner, close back out of there, continuing on down through my sales report window. Just a couple last ones I want to look at before we finish up our webinar this morning. Down towards the bottom there is lost sales report by category or lost sales report by technician. They are very similar in nature. We'll go ahead and we'll print the one by category and give it a second to pull up. We often get a question about keeping track of declined sales or items that were saved to history. These would be the reports I would point you towards to give you some visibility into those particular numbers. In this case, when I print it to the screen, again, what you'll see is that based upon the category in this case, as it brings itself up, we had in breaks 584 jobs that were sold. I had 170 jobs that were declined, totaling this dollar amount in the time frame, in our case, the month of April. We also had 189 estimates that were saved. So we've got open estimates and we have saved estimates. The difference is the open estimate piece is looking at my estimates in progress. So it's calculating up the total that's here, just sitting as an estimate. The saved estimate piece is looking at history to see what estimates were saved into history in that time frame. So if I was to open up one of my transactions here, go to my Other Information tab, click on Change Status to go ahead and save that into history. Now it will show up on my lost sales report in this section here where it says saved estimates, because it's not visible on screen as an open estimate, but it's been saved off to history. So again, visible views by either category and or technician. And one last report before we get to our sales report window. It's our lost sales report, our sales by labor operation report. We often get a question of, well, I'd like to keep track not of units of sale, meaning how many filters, how many tires, how many brake pads did I sell, but I'd like to see how many wheel alignments did I do, or how many cabin air filter remove and replace jobs were on tickets. And that's our sales by labor operation report. As we compile this report, it's going to give us totals based upon the category. So if I was to bring that up on screen, I could see that this was my brake category, 582 jobs. But again, I can drill in and I can see we did 149 brake evaluations. which we did charge a little bit of labor for some of those, but the majority of them obviously done at no charge. We did 23 front disk hardware kit remove and replace jobs in the time frame that we've defined, and in this case I could even go down further and say, well, let me see exactly what transactions each of those was performed on. So again, the sales by labor operation report is I'm looking to count how many jobs did I actually do in a particular service category of a specific labor job is going to point us towards those numbers. A couple last pieces before we finish up looking at the sales reports window. Down at the bottom there's a button there that says batch. As I talked about going through end of day at the end of the evening, the other thing we can do is we can establish or set up a batch. Notice when I click on batch, lights up this column down the left-hand side, and I have 3 different reports that I included in my batch. When my service advisor or whomever is going through end of day finishes up their day, they'll go ahead and run end of day, and then they'll come in here, and all they do is they hit batch and they hit print, and it will compile each of these reports and spool it off to the printer. So if I have specific reports that I want to see as part of my nightly close, then I would include them in the batch, and all again they'll have to do is just hit batch and hit print. This setting is unique per terminal, meaning if I've got 2 computers up at the front, and some nights we close on this one, other nights we close on the other one, we will want to set the batch on each. I would tell you that my advice is always run your end of day from the same computer. That way it's not going to matter how it's configured. You'll always get the same and consistent results. But again, these settings are unique per terminal. So if I'm going to potentially want to run a batch from more than one, I can either set them uniquely and or make sure they're consistent to again see consistent behavior. If I wanted to add one in, all I do is just double click on it, and once I do, I'll just hit save in the lower right hand corner, and then again from there, each time I come in and hit batch, it knows exactly which ones I've got inclusive in my batch. So we're looking at sales and other reports today. I'm going to close out of my sales report window and go into the other reports. And in this other report listing, again, a handful of different reports that didn't really fall into a sales category, so into more of a miscellaneous other reports for us to look at. So for example, if I wanted to see the sequence report, when I click on print, it's going to ask me for a RO number range. So I'd like to look at from this RO to this RO, what's open, what's closed, what the total transaction amount was. Were there any that were voided or reopened in that time frame? More specifically, what's on open repair orders, what's labor is outstanding and or on open repair orders, and or were there any repair orders reopened within a designated time frame. As you continue down, call history and call statistics are driven by a function of RWriter called caller ID. We do have integrated caller ID inside of the program. There's information about it out on our website, docs.rwriter.com, but if you're using that integrated caller ID functionality, so it will populate into our call history and our call statistics. If you're using the scheduler, and 5 different reports down here that are associated with the scheduler, if I'd like to print my schedule for the day and or see what reminders were sent within a given time frame, I can use those, again, reflective of activity based upon the scheduler. And then the most common report that you run in other reports is down here at the very bottom, where it says, well, let's print an employee timesheet. And if I was to print that for a specific date range, it says here are the employees that have punches within that time frame. And again, as it brings it up, it will list them out 2 punches per line, meaning if I'm having them punch in the morning, punch out for lunch, I would see in, out, and then in, out again. Newer with version 1.3.0, we've got the option to go ahead and define why they punched in, meaning if you're using the time clock, what you'll notice is up here at the top, underneath quick functions and then time clock, we've got an option to punch people in or out, and as we punch them out, are they taking a break? Are they going to punch out for their meal, and or are they going home for the day to punch them out from work? So again, as you look at out reason, that's driven by did we punch them out from work, a meal, or break? And if we made any edits, who made the edit, and then why did they make the edit? So again, the employee timesheet, probably the most common report I would point you towards in that other reports section. Again, if you're using the scheduler, certainly those have various applications. If you're using the caller ID functionality as well, but really that employee timesheet down there at the very bottom.